We've been looking at what it means to host the presence of God, to entreat his presence, and to bring his presence near. And we've been looking at what it takes to bring his presence near. And that's really everything about what our church is in these days. It's about his presence. It's about having his manifest presence come to you. You can experience God's presence in a way that you can't other days. You can experience his presence in greater means. It's not always the same. And you can experience his presence because James tells us that those who seek him will find him. I mean, James tells us that if you draw near to him, he draws near to you. So as you draw near to him, he comes. And so we've been talking about his presence and about all that he is. And we've been looking at David and David's pursuit of the presence of God. And we've been talking about that. And we said there's 90 days of blessing where we just want to pursue his presence. And we talked about hungering for him. And we talked about pursuing it because largely his presence has been lost in the church. And today we want to talk about just one thing. I'm just going to do a little capsulated thing here because I just really want to minister to people. But God's presence has to be pursued. And often people go, well, his presence is always there, so why do we pursue it? His presence has to be pursued because if it's not, for the most, unless God does something sovereignly outside of your will, you'll never experience his presence in any kind of real way. Because you have to pursue his presence. You have to go after his presence. If you neglect his presence, it may be there, but you will not be aware of it. His presence may be, his presence is something that you need to pursue. And apart from a sovereign move of God, unless you pursue his presence, you will never experience it. And I think about this. David, if he wouldn't have pursued the ark, it probably would have stayed in the home of Abinadab. It probably would have just stayed there. And I hate to think how long it would have stayed there had he not pursued the ark. Had he not got hungry and said, I want this, had he not put a plan together to pursue it, I wonder how long the ark would have stayed in the home of Abinadab. Neglected. And so we've been doing this for 19 months. Here's what I learned. If you want to experience his presence, you have to pursue it. I mean, it's really not rocket science. You have to pursue his presence. Unless a sovereign move of God comes completely outside of your control. If you want to experience his presence, you need to pursue his presence. You need to draw near to him. When you draw near to him, he draws near to you. And if we want a corporate experience of his presence, we need to draw near. We need to pursue. Now, the question that we're looking at is, how do you do that? How do you entreat the presence of God? How do you have it so that God of all creation comes near to you and is attracted by what you're doing? That he would come near to you. How do you entreat his presence? And I would say this, we're going to talk about it a little bit, but I'm just going to start touching base on it. But you need to pursue his presence his way, not the world's. And that sounds weird to say, pursuing his presence the world's way. The world's not pursuing his presence. So what's that all about? Well, the people in those days did not know what to do with God's presence. The Philistines, when they stole the ark, didn't know what to do with it. It was making them sick. 70 priests died. And it was a learning curve for David. He didn't know what to do with this. Now follow me. Here he is, a man after God's heart, a man of passion. No one around him would probably be somebody who loves the presence of God more than he does. He's more passionate about God than his contemporaries, and yet David himself was not prepared to bring the ark back to Jerusalem. Keep in mind now, the ark represents the manifest presence of God. People do not know how to handle his presence. They didn't know how, and David himself, a man of great passion, made a terrible mistake in trying to entreat the ark. A priest died. Priests died. People got sick. All because they didn't know how to handle the ark. See, there was a plan. I'm getting somewhere. There was a plan in how the ark should be carried. Now, what David did is he took it and he put it on an ark, on a cart. But there was a plan. God had a plan on how the ark was to be cared for, how it was to be transported. But David forgot. Because it says in 1 Chronicles 13:3 that he did not inquire of the Lord. Now stay with me. I'm going somewhere. It says David did not inquire of the Lord. Now let's just stop for a second. Here's a man after God's own heart. Why would he not inquire of the Lord? Why would a passionate man like David not inquire of God? I mean, if you expect it, it's like look around this world and say, who's the most spiritual person I could think of? And then find them tell you, well, I made huge mistakes because I didn't inquire of God. That's actually quite shocking. David, the most anointed king, did not inquire of the Lord. Now, how could that have happened? That he got to a place where he just went ahead and did stuff without even coming to God. I think our message today is in the explanation of that. So let me just share this a little bit. I want you to think about this, okay? Remember, he said no one inquired of the Lord in the whole reign of King Saul. Remember that? No one. So we're thinking that we're looking at almost 40 years where the ark was hidden away and no one came near it and no one inquired of it. Now just to refresh you, remember Moses was told by God, when you come before the ark, I will come and meet with you there. And above the cherubim, I will speak to you. So God's presence would actually come down and meet with Moses. Now, no one did that. For at least we believe about 40 years. No one did this. The ark sat neglected. Okay, so now watch this. That meant David grew up in a culture, a religious culture that did not have God. He grew up in a religious culture where people did not come before the ark and inquire of the Lord. Are you with me? That's for 40 years, that's what he saw from the king before him. For all these years, people didn't do that. His leader did not do that. His king, of course, did not do that. His mentor, they did not. No one was an example to him of what it meant to inquire of the Lord. Now watch this. And so even though he was a man after God's own heart, he himself fell into a pattern of neglect. Even though he had this great passion for God, David himself fell into a pattern of neglect. And see, watch this. Instead of following God's plan, he followed the pattern of the world. The Philistines was the pattern of the world that he followed. See, if you remember, when the ark was stolen by the Philistines and then they got sick by it, they didn't want it any longer. So he said, let's get rid of this ark. Let's throw it on a cart. We'll send it off and get rid of it. Now, it had been so long since David had seen anybody inquire of the Lord that this is what he saw. This is how he saw people handled God. This is how they handled the ark. So David said, this is my God. I can do one step better. I can go one step better on this. And he got a new cart. Big new cart. Not with cattle, but with oxen. And he had them begin to pull it. And it wasn't until the oxen stumbled as the cart began to shake that Uzzah the priest reaches out to try to stabilize the ark, and God strikes him dead. It was not till that point that David's going, what's going wrong here? There's a lot of us, we grew up in a church culture without God. And we get to a point where something happens like this, and we get a wake-up call, and we go, what's going on here? What's going on here? What's going on? And it says David becomes fearful all of a sudden. And he wonders, well, then who can do this? Who can do this? And he begins to think like the men around him. I want you to think, it says he begins to think like the men of Kir-Jearim and say, who can stand in the presence of this Lord, this holy God? He begins to think it's not possible. And the fact is, he's having a wake-up call. He's having a wake-up call. When Uzzah died, he has a wake-up call, and he realizes, I've done this all wrong. I've done this all wrong. And the problem was, and I want you to follow me, is that David did not inquire of the Lord on how to do it, and he just went ahead and went about it the world's way. The ark was to be carried by Levite priests from the tribe of the Korahites. It was to be on their shoulders, carried by a pole, not pulled by an animal. So that's what he did. But, I mean, that's not what he did. He did it the world's way. Now, I want you to think about this, and I'm going to pull it together. Think about the church in this hour and the culture in which we live. The world around us is screaming at us with every latest thing, latest trend, latest stuff. And so in the process of building the church, in the process of being Christians, we're tempted to take our cues from the world as to how to do church. And we take our cues from how to entreat crowds and not the Lord. I was talking, as I said, with this pastor yesterday, and he said when Mike Bickle started this house of prayer in 1990 or wherever it was, 99, he left the church to start a 24/7 prayer, and people said, you're crazy. You're crazy. Can't do that. That's crazy. Leaving a church, you can't do that. That's not how you do church. See, what we've done is we've taken our cues from what it means to be a Christian, and we've taken a lot of it from the world, from media. We take our cues from how to be church from the world and in social programs. We take our cues from the world of how to entreat crowds, not the Lord. And then it becomes foreign to somebody to say, we just spend an hour a week with the Lord. That's just so foreign. Can you imagine that? To entreat the Lord for an hour, that's weird. That's weird. Why? Because we're taking our cues from other things. We're taking our cues from those things which are not of the kingdom. And that's an issue for all of us, for pastors, people in general. And see, here's what happens. When we take our cues from the world around us like David did, we land up doing the wrong things. We land up doing things that we think will attract the world around us. We land up missing the things that attract God's presence. And we don't do those things, so God doesn't show up. So then it becomes a vicious circle. So then when he doesn't show up, you know what I'm saying? We got to try something else. Now, watch this. We've been raising generations in a church culture where that's how churches grow. We've been raising generations of Christians in a culture where ultimately we satisfy the people before satisfying God. And that's a culture that you and I have grown up in. And so we become more aware of what the world wants than what God wants. My first pastorate, we were in a church, country church, and it was a great start. Let me tell you, it was a church that was wounded. They had a split before we got there, 51-49. It was not We led worship one day, maybe 12 minutes. You guys love this. 12 minutes maybe. I'm at the door shaking hands at the end, and one of the men came up to me and said, if you do that again, I'll throw a ball at you. If you go more than 10 minutes, I'll throw a ball at you. I'll bring a glove, I said. I didn't say that. And then so people learn to take their cue from people who want what they want, and we don't. And pretty soon, God's not what matters anymore. It's what people want. His presence is not key anymore. And we start to treat him just very weird. And see, what we're doing is we're taking our cue from what people want. We're taking our cue from what's going on around us. And we become more aware of the needs around us and the needs of people than we are aware of what God wants. And so that's what we take our cue. Now, here's where a message comes in, okay? Here's where a message comes in. And this is why it's so important. I think that's what happened with David. I think that's what happened with David. I mean, he's a man after God's own heart, for crying out loud. He's a man who knew what it was to be passionate with God. This is a tragic misstep. This is a tragic. David grew up in a culture for so long that he took on the culture himself. A culture of neglect. And it's not even what he wanted to do. That's not even in his heart. Now here's the message. I was going over this the other day, and I had much more to spend. And I felt God say, there are people here today, men in particular for you, that you've forgotten what it means to be a man of God. And I'm supposed to call it out of you today. David forgot. David forgot. David forgot what it meant to be who he was. And so he fell into neglect. Do you know when you forget what God's got in you, you can fall into neglect just as easy. Now, this is for ladies too, of course. It's not just for men. I mean, men have different things. You know, we've been pushed down, told to be quiet, don't be a man, don't be aggressive, don't be all that stuff. Be a wimp, don't be all that stuff. And in the process, we forgot who God made us to be. A passionate man after God's own heart. I love David. A warrior, but passion. The world's tried to push that down in men. But ladies, I also believe that there's these issues that God has caused you to be so busy in your life that you've forgotten what's really there as well. And I believe what we're to do this morning is, first of all, for the men, I'm to call that out of you. To wake up. Wake up passion. Wake up this man of God within you. Wake up the man of God deep within your heart. Wake up the man who has a heart full of passion and zeal. I just sense that, every man here has a passionate heart after God. Some of us have just not realized it. I want to call that out of you today. I want to call that out of you today. Every man in this room, I believe, has passion stirring in your heart. Some of you just don't realize it yet. And I believe I'm supposed to call that out of you. So I'm going to invite you to stand today. I'm not going to go any farther than this. But if David could get to a place where he took his cue from everything else so he would get squashed down and actually neglect the one he loved the most, how could that not happen with us? Would you stand, please, each one? Jenny, if you would just come to the keyboard again. I just have a sense God wants to wake us up deep within, calling us men to a place where there's a seed that he wants to awaken. He wants to spark it back to life. He wants to bring it to life. He wants to bring that passion That's kind of squashy. You might have been taking your cues from TV. You've been taking your cues for all the place around you. But that's not who you are. Who you are is deep within inside you, and God wants to call that out of you. Who you are is inside you, and God wants to call that out of you today. God wants us to bring that to life within you today. So, man, if you would be so kind, I want to pray with you. I'm going to invite you to come and stand here. We have a little gift for you after, but I just want to speak into your life and just say, wake up today. I want to call forth who you really are. How could it be David, a man after God's own heart, so passionate for God, so passionate for Him, yet fall to a pattern of neglect like everybody else around him? I want to call out of you, man. I want to call you to that place where you are a man of passion. Where you're not taking your cues from the world, but you're taking it from God. You're not taking your cues from those around you. You're more concerned about what God has than what is around you.